His Excellency Mr. D.C. Manjunath, esteemed speaker Mr. Sanjeev, partners, sponsors, members, and volunteers, I, Dhruva Ghosh, President of Tagore Society of Houston, on its behalf, I am honored to welcome you all to the 10th Annual Tagore Talk. It feels so special to stand here and welcome you all back to the annual Tagore Talk that we started in 2011. As many of you know, it has been a significant pause, almost nearly 6 years since our last Tagore Talk, mostly due to the pandemic, which caused events like our cherished talk to be put on hold. But tonight, we celebrate renewal of a tradition and the enduring power of TSH's mission to propagate the universality of Tagore's thoughts, ideals, and philosophy of a borderless world. Founded in 1974 with the mission to disseminate Tagore's message, the Society has shown remarkable resilience throughout its 50-year history. Next, I would like to invite the Honorable Consul General of India, His Excellency Mr. D.C. Manjunath, to the podium to say a few words.
Keynote speaker of 2025 Tagore Talk, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, members of Tagore Society of Houston, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good evening and namaskar. We all know Houston has a special connection with Tagore. He visited Houston as early as 1921, where he engaged with American intellectuals and artists. The Tagore Memorial Grove, the Ray Miller Park, which we just saw in the pictures, with Gurudev's more than life-size statue stands tall as testament to his legacy. The Tagore Society of Houston, which celebrated its golden anniversary of its establishment last year, stands as a beacon of cultural exchange and understanding between India and the United States. The Society has tirelessly promoted Tagore's philosophy of harmony, universalism, and humanism through various cultural events, lectures, and educational initiatives. In this regard, we heard about the Tagore Talk from Mr. President's speech. After a short hiatus, we are starting this Tagore Talk series. This talk series holds a significance, particular significance, by bringing the best of intellectuals and speakers to address and interact with the distinguished audience here in Houston. The keynote speaker of this year's Tagore Talk and the topic of today's address couldn't have been better. You would all recall that last month we had a panel discussion centered around Viksit Bharat 2047 vision and Honorable Prime Minister's podcast to Lex Friedman, moderated by our own Sunanda ji, with distinguished Indian American leaders and technocrats in Houston in these very premises, and as panel members, including Partha ji. I'm glad to note that we're continuing that theme with Bharat as civilization, government reforms, the road to a developed India. And who better than Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who is a renowned economist, historian, and author of various books on Indian economy and history, and recipients of various awards, including Kalinga Book Award, could we have for addressing us on this topic today. Sir, on behalf of the consulate of India in Houston on behalf of the Tagore Society and also the larger diaspora of Houston, and on my personal behalf, I would like to once again welcome you to Houston. Houston is not new to you. You were earlier here as part of the Houston India Conference organized by the consulate along with other partners, including the Chamber and USISPF, which was also moderated by Sunitaji. We very much look forward to your address today. Before concluding, I would like to commend the Tagore Society of Houston for bringing together this much anticipated talk and this beautiful event today. I would also like to compliment all the supporting organizations, including the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, Asia Society, USISPF, IIT, alumni of Greater Houston, EGMH, and the Foundation of India Studies, and all the patrons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Manjunatha. That was an excellent introduction. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Sunanda Vashisht, our distinguished moderator for today's event. Sunanda Vashisht is a writer, political commentator, and a columnist. She writes for several news portals, and has been a columnist for daily news and analysis, and now exclusively for First Post. Her bylines appear in Houston Chronicle, Denver Post, Indian Express, Economic Times, and Swarajya, and many others. Her areas of focus has been conflict-ridden state of Jammu and Kashmir, and she has written extensively covering all aspects of the conflict that is considered one of the most volatile region of South Asia. In 2019, she represented the Kashmiri Pandit's voice and addressed the human rights situation in Kashmir at the US Congress Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Sunandaji has also started the first ever weekly podcast show devoted to Indian and Indo-American issues called My Ind Podcast. Currently, she hosts Epicenter podcast series that has successfully completed 2 seasons. Ms. Sunandaji.
Wow, thank you. This is a full house. Congratulations to all of you for choosing the best thing to do on a Saturday afternoon on a long weekend. This is where you would rather be than anywhere else. Thank you for the warm invite, Tagore Society of Houston. It's truly an honor and privilege to be invited here. I have been asked to introduce today's distinguished speaker, and when the organizers told me this, I don't think they understood how complex of a job that is. Like the man, like the icon this talk is named after, our distinguished speaker also happens to be not a bit, but quite a lot of polymath. He is a luminary whose intellect and insight illuminate the intersections of history, economics, and culture. As I was driving here, Sanjeev is also a very dear friend for a long time. As I was driving here, I was thinking, what is the best way to introduce him? I could rattle off all those things that you can see in Google search. I can say that each one of his accomplishments on his resume is next accomplishment is even better than the previous accomplishment. He's a distinguished economist. In his previous life, was a much sought after banker. He's India's currently best known public intellectual. He's a best-selling author. He's a historian. He's an urban theorist. Currently, he is a member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council in India. And before that, he was principal economic advisor to the finance minister. And if that isn't enough, and if you're not already that, he's also a shipbuilder now. So, from his days as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford to his pivotal role in shaping India's economic policies, he has consistently challenged conventional narratives with rigor and clarity. Now, this was what you read on Google. And how do I introduce Sanjeev? If I just say this, it would be unfair and it would be underselling him. Sanjeev's contribution truly is in the realm of ideas and nurturing intellectuals. Because I have been in the same space, his only contribution, his biggest contribution, can be measured by how many public intellectuals, how many authors, how many historians, how many commentators like myself he has mentored and who have now become celebrities in their own right. And each one of them, if you ask them, they will tell you that it was that one conversation with Sanjeev, one book, one sentence in his book, one YouTube video, one something from him that really got them going and gave them the courage and to go forward. That's one contribution. Another contribution is he can see things much, much before because he reads patterns. Probably that comes from his training as a banker or as an economist. He makes these patterns long before anybody can make them. He can see things long before anybody can see. And the example for this is a lot of things that we say today, a lot of things that have become part of our debating things, and we talk and debate in commons. A decade ago, none of this was common. None of this was common. And let me give you an example. In 2008, recall what you were doing in 2008, recall what the world was in 2008, and recall where India was in 2008. He wrote a book called Indian Renaissance, India's Rise After 1,000 Years of Decline, where he talked about economic and cultural revival of India. This is 2008. Nobody was talking about any revival. Forget about economic, forget about cultural revival. But he did see that there is some cultural resurgence going on somewhere. He did see that we have demographic advantage. He did see that the reforms, if we take care of the bureaucratic reforms, if we take care of the educational reforms, next decade is going to be that of India. This was in 2008. And he guessed that. Guess what? We're all talking about revival now. In 2018, revival was not a word that you often heard. After that, quickly, he wrote Land of Seven Rivers, a brief history of India's geography in 2012, where he taught us how to look at India's history via its geography. So now a lot of manufactured, I call them manufactured fault lines that you see today about north versus south and east versus west and this versus that, those are manufactured fault lines. In his book way back in 2012, he said, the geography, our sacred geography is same from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. So where is there any kind of, fault line anywhere that you see? He connects geography to culture and identity, same Bharatiya identity. This was way back in 2012 when nobody was looking at history via geography. And by framing history through geography, Sanjeev offers a fresh lens on India's past, making complex historical processes, if you've read his book, relatable and enjoyable. And then comes, I'm quickly going over this, then comes Ocean of Churn, my favorite of all his books. And that book, where he wrote about how Indian Ocean shaped human history, this is before anybody was talking about Indian Ocean. Sanjeev taught us to look at Indian Ocean, claim Indian Ocean, because Indian Ocean is the only ocean that is named after a country. He said India is a maritime power. Why do we look at it as a landlocked country? All of us in this room have looked at India as a landlocked country from the prism of Delhi, because Delhi doesn't have any ocean around it. So we thought that India doesn't have any ocean around it. He was the first one to say, long before Atlantic Ocean became the stage, this is where this is the center stage was Indian Ocean, and we need to claim it. And then came the tour de force, revolutionaries, where he taught us to relook at our own Indian freedom struggle, where he said the history that we read in books, and this was a provocative book, continues to be a provocative book, where he said that you need to look at history. This is not the only history that we read. This is not, there are other histories. And if you've been taught about certain people as revolutionaries or people who went around, they were not just singular people doing something on their own. There was a method to their madness. There is a history. There is something behind that. So we need to look at it, and we need to give that movement, the revolutionary movement, the respect that it deserves. So these are just 4 books, and he's written so much more. He writes a column almost every week, and he has sparked discussions in academic circles, policy forums, and public spaces. Globally, his books and his ideas have contributed to a nuanced understanding of India's role in world history. For the Tagore Society of Houston audience, Sanjeev's focus on cultural synthesis and universalism aligns with Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore's vision of global harmony, making his scholarship a fitting centerpiece for dialogue on India's past and future. Before I welcome Sanjeev to the podium, I just have a few announcements to make. First of all, you do not want to look at your phone for next hour or 2 hours. Please put them away. I would say put them on silent mode, or just nab them away. You will not miss your phone in next 2 hours. I can assure you that. Second, after the keynote, after Sanjeev's keynote speech, we will do a Q&A. And I will be moderating that. And what we can do is, we'll do in a fireside chat format. It will be an informal conversation about a lot of things that are weighing on everybody's mind. You can all participate through question and answers. What we have done is, each one of your tables will have Q&A cue cards, and there will be, yes. Thank you, Jagdeep. There are cue cards. You can write, there are pens there. And if you can't find it, the volunteers are around. They can pass around. So please write your name, though. Please write your name so that I can acknowledge from the stage. Please write your name, and please write your question. It has to be a question, not a comment, not an essay, and not a paragraph. Just a question that we can ask Sanjeev, and we will take it from there. And another important announcement is that the question should revolve around the topic for today. It's very important, and that's the only way I'll be able to take it. If the question revolves around what he has spoken or what we will be talking in our thing, I will be able to take it so that we can keep the focus of today's evening on the topic that we have for the day. And with that now, I humbly request Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal to come here on the stage and make this evening worthwhile for us.
Thank you, Sunanda. After that introduction, I'm under some performance pressure. Okay, thank you very much. It's up there, yep. Okay. So let me begin by thanking the Tagore Society of Houston for inviting me here to be here today, and all of you for taking the time out this afternoon. It is indeed an honor for me to deliver this year's Tagore Memorial Talk. And let me say that the topic I have chosen, as you will see, is a reasonably hot topic these days, which is about how to make governments more efficient. And so I'm going to talk about the fact that there is, of course, a lot of talk about the DOGE effort that is happening here in the US with Elon Musk. But let me say that we have been also doing something in India with similar objectives, but using a very different kind of style of doing it. So as the topic states on the screen, they have gone for blitzkrieg, but we have gone for attrition warfare. And hopefully I will try to convince you that at least in the Indian context, the attrition warfare approach works for us. maybe even it may have some application in the US as well. So before I go forward, let me explain what on earth it is that this whole effort is about. So in India, we don't call it Doge. We call this whole effort process reforms. And what is process reforms as opposed to any other kind of reforms? You see, when reforms are usually talked about in India and many other places as well, typically you will hear the term structural reform. Yeah? Now, it's almost as if that is the only kind of reform that can happen. But structural reforms are actually a very particular kind of reform. They are actually about changing the structure of something. So they tend to be reforms such as, for example, in India, introducing GST. That changes the structure of the taxation system. Or, for example, introducing the insolvency bankruptcy code. That changed the structure of creative destruction. And, I was personally involved in cleaning up the banking system using it. So it was a completely different way of doing it. Or introducing inflation targeting, which changed the way our monetary policy was being done. Or if you go back to 1991, that, those original reforms, that was a structural change in how the system worked. However, there is another kind of reform that almost nobody talks about, which is really the nuts and bolts of making an existing policy or system or process a little more efficient. Now, this is the nuts and bolts. Very often, it does not hit the newspaper headlines. If it does at all, it'll be there on the 5th page, some small place, some rule number 43C, subsection D were changed, 3 words were changed. And literally nobody other than those who did it, and maybe that little sector where it had a change, will know something about it. But in fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of such changes that are needed to make the economic system work better. They don't change the structure. Sometimes they do cumulatively, I suppose. But by and large, this is what real reforms is about. It's the boring grunt work of making all those changes that I'm going to take you through. Hopefully not in a boring way. But basically, the problem is that there is almost no literature on how this is done. Now, those of you who have studied an MBA will know that you've almost certainly gone through studying something on business process reengineering. Yeah, not an uncommon thing. But for some reason, there is almost no literature on government process reengineering. Not even in public administration courses do you learn this. It's very odd, because when I began to go down this path, I thought there would be literature to read. There is some literature on individual case studies. That you'll find. Somebody did something. But there is no actual theory of this. There is no setup, or there's no accumulation of knowledge in this space. So as a result, I had to start from scratch. And so what I did was I delved into the literature that is there for business process reengineering and began to effectively tweak it in order to be able to use it for government systems. So here is something, as I said, those of you who have done an MBA probably know something like this, but it is slightly different. So obviously the first thing to do is to figure out why on earth you would want to do a process reform. The second thing to do is to document that process as is. The third is to identify what in the process is inefficient. And now that I've done hundreds of these reforms, let me say that usually 90% of the problem is actually caused by 10% of the process. So you don't really need to fix the whole thing. You don't need a structural change. You just need to change some 10% tinkering somewhere, and the whole thing begins to move much more smoothly. And then, of course, you need to do those changes. So you need to push all those changes. And finally, having done those changes, you need to monitor the new process. I.e., did whatever change you did lead to the outcomes you wanted? And very importantly, in the governments, this is very important, the fact, did it have unintended consequences? Sometimes, by the way, those unintended consequences are positive, but sometimes they are not. So this is what it is. You don't have to remember it. What I'm going to do is to give you a large number of examples, and I'm going to illustrate all of this. Sorry about putting you through a little bit of the background theory, but it gets a little easier, I assure you. Now, what I'm going to do is to take you through 7 types of such reforms that are there, that I have identified. This is a list I've arbitrarily created. If you come up with a new type, I'll add it to the list. And I'm going to give you one example of a reform that I'm personally involved in. And I'll give you a variety of them, some that I've implemented, some that I'm implementing, some that I have not succeeded in getting them done. But they're all that I'm personally involved in, so that you have a flavor of how these reforms are done. So the type 1 is simply revisiting default lists and precedents in the government. This is the easiest ones to do. Type 2, streamlining the existing process. Type 3, changing regulations within the given law. Type 4, you have to actually go back to the legislators to change the law. 5, adding some capacity at some level of government. 6, removing some state mandated activity to remove a bottleneck. And finally, merging, closing, restructuring outdated government agencies. As I said, I will give you examples of each one of these that are recently been done or are live. This is the first kind of reforms. Now, what am I talking about? You see, any large system, it could be a government, it could be a university, it could be a large corporation, they all function based on some default precedent, default system that it functions on. Nobody knows why on earth it functions that way, but it does. Okay? So, for example, I'm sure CGI will know this. The default lists of invitees that are called to embassy parties. Nobody revises them. Now, I'm not subjected to the Indian. Okay? I'm subjected to quite a few of them because I live in Delhi, so I'm subjected to the ones of the foreign countries in India. And I'll go to some of these parties, it'll be of some country, and I will attend them. And of course, I will suddenly find somebody who was a celebrity in the 1970s and I had assumed they had died. But they're there. The only place that they have continued to survive, because nobody bothers to change these lists. At the margin, they'll add something, but basically they continue to exist. And so, when I was the principal economic advisor in the finance ministry, I was handed similar lists. For example, just before, every year before the budget, the finance minister meets different interest groups, there can be companies and various economists, etc., for ideas. And that also has a list. Every year the same list is called. Now, as principal economic advisor, I was handed the list and told to carry out the inviting process. So, I went through the list and discovered that it was literally full of people who were no longer alive. And I had to get rid of them from the list and add a few people in. So, this is a common problem, and I'm now going to illustrate this with the list of national monuments that India has. Okay? So, India has 3,695 national monuments which are under the protection of the Archaeological Survey of India. They come under the AMSAR Act, and those of you who visited national monuments in India, they'll have this blue board next to it, which will threaten you with dire consequences if you did anything to the monument. Now, how did we end up with this 3,695 monuments? Who decided that these were monuments of national importance? So, about a couple of years ago, the Honorable Prime Minister asked me to look into this list. Now, it's not a normal thing for the economic advisor to do, but for some reason he thought that I should do it, so I looked into it. And so this is what I discovered. I discovered that some 2/3 odd of it were a list of monuments that happened to be in the list of the colonial era government. So they were just inherited from the British. And of the rest, almost all of them were also from the princely states. So other than a very small number of national monuments that were added since independence, over 77 years, essentially most of these monuments are ones that the British had included into their list or the princely states had included into the list. So they were basically, the list that existed in 1947 is roughly the list that exists today. So I began to dig into this list. And here is also what I discovered. First of all, there are several dozen monuments that the Archaeological Survey of India has lost. They don't actually know where they are. They have budgets, they're supposed to look after them. And this is not a recent phenomenon. There are questions in Parliament from the 1970s where the Archaeological Survey of India has stated that it has no idea where that monument is. Okay? Now, of the rest, there are several hundred that are monuments which are obscure monuments. For example, graves and cemeteries of British officers. I'm not talking about even famous ones, Victoria Memorial or something like that. These are PWD engineer killed by some tribesmen in Nagaland 100 years ago. Now my guess is that the guy who killed him should be a national hero. He was a freedom fighter. We have no idea where his grave is. But the grave that is protected is not much bigger than the stage. It is of no archaeological value. So it's not because I have some, it's a beautiful building or something. It's just some random cement thing with the name of a PWD engineer who nobody knows. But all the rules and regulations that apply to the Taj Mahal apply to this also. So it has, for example, the AMSAR Act says that 100 plus 200 yards, that's 300 yards around that monument are protected. And if you want to make some changes there, you have to actually go to the Archaeological Survey Circle Officer and get special permission. So you can imagine what happens as a result of this. Many of these monuments are in very densely populated areas. And there are houses around them, there are people living there. And so every time, if you want to actually do some small change into your house, you have to actually go and seek permission from the Archaeological Survey, which of course means you have to go and a lot of harassment and not to mention rent seeking that happens as a result of this. So here is the story of one of these cases that I will tell you. There was a brigadier general called John Nicholson who, after the Great Revolt of 1857-58, was key to the retaking by the British of the city of Delhi, what we now call Old Delhi. So in 1858, he was the one who retook for the East India Company the city of Delhi. And he carried out a major massacre there when he did it. And even by the standards of that time, he was thought to be quite extreme. Anyway, he was of course a hero to the British. And after he died, both his grave, which is in North Delhi, and a statue was established in front of Kashmiri Gate. Both of these were made into national monuments. So they raised a nice big statue to John Nicholson in front of Kashmiri Gate, which of course he had sacked. So there was a big statue, and they were both inherited by independent India as national monuments. And it continued to be a national monument. Now that is not the sad part. The weird part, this is where it really gets weird. It's somewhere in the 1960s, his village in Northern Ireland wrote to the Indian government and said, look, we assume that now you don't have any use for John Nicholson's statue, why don't you give it to us? So the government of that time agreed, they packed his statue and they sent it off to Northern Ireland, to his village where it has been, which is put up, and I'm assuming every year on his birthday or something they commemorate him, etc. So that statue went away. But that spot was never taken off the list of national monuments. And as a result of which, and remember this is Kashmiri Gate, it is one of the most densely packed places in Delhi. As a result of it, the rules and regulations that apply, that 300-meter rule, continue to be applied to this empty space. And so, if you happen to be living in that area, you had to actually still go to the archaeological survey, bribe the clerk or whoever is in charge to get permission to make any changes inside your own house. And this continued to be true till last year when I discovered this problem. And in July of 2024, this non-statue was finally taken off our list of national monuments. A little bit after this, I discovered this. The cemetery of John Nicholson, which is also a national monument. You can see the blue board there threatening you dire consequences for desecrating it. And 300 yards around it is also protected. So as a result of which all the graves of other people who nobody knows who they are also part of the national monuments. And so this is also, as of just a few months ago, has been taken off the list of national monuments. I'm telling you all of this just to give you a flavor of how something continues as a default just because nobody bothers to look into it. Which is a hint to the Consul General that he should look at his list of invitees. Now I'm going to look at another kind of reforms, which is to look at administrative streamlining. Now here, this is a reform where I don't have to change any rules or regulations or anything. This just happens to be a formal process that has evolved, and you can change it even under the current rules and regulations. I am going to give you an example of something I've been involved in called voluntary liquidation of companies. Now, companies shut down everywhere in the world routinely, it's not a new thing. And everywhere in the world, 85 to 90%, even more maybe, of companies that shut down every year, shut down for routine reasons. It's got nothing to do with going bankrupt or something like that. They shut down, they are going concerns, they don't have some debt or there is no major problem. Everybody agrees they should be shut down, and they are shut down because somebody was running a company, they have grown old, their kids don't want to keep running it, so they are shutting it down. Or it was a special purpose vehicle that was shut down, it was set up for some purpose, that purpose is now come to an end, and they're shutting it down. Whatever the reason may be, there are mundane reasons for which companies are shut down every year. However, has anyone who has ever attempted to shut down a company in India, has anybody here ever attempted to shut down a company in India? Yeah, somebody has. There you go. So Mahesh, you know that it used to take years to shut this down, and a total headache. So I looked into this while I was in 2022. I looked into this, and I discovered the following. There are two basic ways of shutting down companies in India. One is through Section 248 of the Companies Act of 2013, and the other is through the Section 59 of IBC. The first one is the main way through which companies are shut down. The second way is used only for very large companies. So I'm going to stick, for the purpose of the presentation, the first one, Companies Act route. And so what I did, as I told you in the beginning, I began to map how that process worked. And this is what I discovered. First of all, it required all kinds of NOCs. And for some reason, you needed to get those no objection certificates in a certain sequence. There was not written anywhere. You have to go to income tax and this and that and from various people, which is fine. I'm not objecting to that. I'm just saying, why do you need to get it in sequence? You can do it parallelly. Then, after you've got all the paperwork together, you had to go to the registrar of companies and give all their things, and then they were supposed to put out an ad stating that so-and-so company wants to shut down. Does anyone have any objections? Which is also fair, was in case there is some outstanding liability, because once you extinguish it, that company is a legal person, that legal person is dead, you now can't go and claim anything. So it's fair enough that it's advertised. But we discovered that the biggest bottleneck, in fact, was this. The register of companies was basically squat on this advertisement for years, sometimes, till you paid them off. So again, I looked into the matter and, of course, presented this to the Honorable Finance Minister. I also presented him a rate card of how much it required to be bribed to get your advertisement out. So we began to work on this issue. As I said, it used to take about, on average, about 499, about 500 days to shut down a company in India. This is when there is no objection. Nobody is objecting to the shutting down of the company. There's no problem. Okay? Everybody agrees that she shut down, and yet it used to take 500 days to shut down a company. So what did we do? In May of 2023, we created a website, and we now allow you to put up, the company is allowed to put up all its details. It automatically sends it to whatever departments are relevant to ask for a no objection certificate. If nobody gets back, after 21 days, it automatically generates a list to be sent to the Registrar of Companies. The Registrar of Companies has to put these up in advertisement automatically unless they have some specific objection, in which case they are supposed to, in writing, state why they want to object. Now, as a result of this change, this website automated system, look at what has happened to the amount of time it takes to shut down a company in India. It has gone from about 500 days to just 60 days. An 88% reduction in time. Yeah, I did not change any regulations or laws. These are the same regulations and laws that existed before. I've just changed the process. Now I'm going to talk about the third time. Here, the laws can remain the same, but the regulations under the law have to be changed. Okay? And I'm going to give you an example of something called the Revised Terms and Conditions of Other Service Providers 2008. If it sounds Orwellian, well, it is. So let me tell you a little bit about it. You all know about the IT BPO industry in India. Now, this industry had a peculiar problem till the year 2000, 2001 because of this rule. You see, these are rules of the Telecom Ministry. Okay? The Telecom Ministry had this rule. The other service providers is short form for anybody who basically use the telecom system to do business. And the rule stated that you had to, anybody who was using the telecom network to do commercial activity had to specifically get permission from the telecom ministry in order to do that commercial activity. And of course, the first problem was there was no clear definition of OSPs. So technically, anybody working from home, literally anybody working from home till the year 2020, could be hauled up for violating this. Just think about it. So any of you went to India and worked off your laptop, all illegal. In addition to this, there were all kinds of local infrastructure requirements. It says that every location that was doing commercial activity using the telecom network needed its own EPA-BX machine. Now, EPA-BX machine is some 1980s, 90s technology, completely relevant in the universe of cloud computing, and yet, technically, all people using this required this. Now, the telecom ministry officials were clever enough not to bother people who were generally working from home. But what they would do is they would apply this to the BPO industry, to IT-enabled services and those kinds of commercial use, big commercial companies. And of course, large amount of rent seeking happened as a result, because these are quite impossible things to deal with. They required, for example, every location that had this required a separate registration. So supposing you work in your bedroom and decide to go to the toilet, separate registration. Then it had an absurd idea that you could not share your international with your domestic BPO or customers. Now let me show you what happens as a result. Supposing I am British Airways, okay? British Airways has a back office outsourcing whatever business in running out of India. It does, in fact, runs out of Gurgaon and Noida, and all their ticketing and their Q&A and all of this stuff works from there. So the original idea was, the way the law was set up, you had to separate the domestic from the international. Now imagine the following problem. Somebody buys a BA ticket in London, comes to India, and has a problem. Calls up the call center. Is this person international or domestic? How does BA know? And yet they could be fined for making this mistake. Now these are completely absurd kind of rules and regulations, and yet our BPO industry, which was quite large and successful even in 2020, was dealing with all of this nonsense. Till I discovered them in the lockdown of 2020. So what happened is, when the lockdown was announced in March of 2020 because of COVID, the Telecom Ministry came up with a notification where it stated that this revised terms and conditions, other service providers regulation of 2008 would not apply during the lockdown in order to enable people to work from home. Now, by now you have realized that I am a suspicious sort of chap. The moment I read this, I knew the real purpose of this is not to actually allow people to work from home, but basically the Telecom Ministry officials were telling people that, we are letting you off for this lockdown period, but really, absurd as these rules may be, they will begin to apply after the lockdown. That is what they were really telling people. So since I discovered this, I began to dig into this. And so I began to change the rules and regulations. After a lot of arguing and a lot of pushback from the Telecom Ministry, I got it changed first in November 2020, in which they added some clauses which cleverly meant that the rule changes I had made did not really apply and the original rules actually applied. So I caught them in the act, and I again changed it in June 2021. So now these rules and regulations basically have been changed to the point that are not really an issue anymore. And as a result of this, let me show you what happened. A NASSCOM study in December 2021 asked people from the GCCs, BPOs and others, what was the benefit that they had from removing of these OSP regulations? And they found that 92% of them said that they had seen a significant reduction in the compliance burden that they were facing. 92%. Okay. Some 28% in fact said that their compliance burden had reduced by 50%. And of course, many of the others had fairly drastic reductions as well. So the point I'm making is, these are the kinds of major changes that happen, and yet if you're not from this industry, you probably have never heard of this OSP regulation. But if you happen to be from it, you almost certainly have heard about how dramatic this change has been. And subsequently, in the last 5 years, you may have seen the huge boom there has been in GCCs across industries, and that was made possible because of this removal of this rule, these regulations. Now I'm going to tell you about legislative changes. So here, laws need to be changed in order to have the impact. So you have to actually go back to Parliament, the state legislature or somebody. So you have to actually do that. And I'm going to give you an example here from the example of something called the Legal Metrology Act. Now, how many of you even know what legal metrology is? Let me see. Nobody? Okay, legal metrology relates to weights, measures, and labels. Yeah, every country in the world has legal metrology rules. The US also does. So we also do. They are useful rules. You need them. You need laws for weights, measures, and labels. But in India, this happens to be the second largest source of small bribery. Traffic rules being number one. So what happens here? You see, the way the rules, legal metrology rules are written in India, they're written such that in the first instance, if you do the first time you do some rule break, the first offense, you can get away with a very small fine. So it could be a few thousand rupees and you get away. But on the second offense, you can be sent to jail for as much as 7 years. So guess what happens? I'll show you in the below. There are literally almost about 1 lakh cases that happen every year that are booked as the first offense. But the second offense is only 12, 5, 3. Imagine a huge country our size, only 3 offenses happened in 2021. So what do you think actually happened? Nothing. You see, basically what is happening is that supposing I'm a manufacturer, the inspector will come, he will find some small spelling mistake in my label and put a first offense. And we'll say, oh, first offense doesn't matter, 2,000 rupees. So you'll give 2,000 rupees, very happy. Now you are slave for life. Because on your second offense, you can be sent to jail for 7 years. So guess what happens? This is, as I told you, the second largest source of retail bribery in India. Now I tried very hard to get rid of some of these provisions. And in the Jan Vishwas Bill of 2022, we got rid of a lot of these provisions. I've tried, but I couldn't get rid of sections 30, 33 and 36. Guess why? Because although I got rid of a lot of provisions and decriminalized them, I didn't get rid of the provisions, sorry, I decriminalized those provisions. I couldn't do 30, 33 and 36 because the bureaucrats know that it's 80% of the cases. So this is a battle I have not yet won, but I have not given up. Now I'm going to talk about another example. Here, of course, as you might by now have guessed, I'm usually quite suspicious of the bureaucracy. But there are certain parts of bureaucracy where you actually need to add capacity. Yeah? This is one example that I'm going to talk to you about. This is about the intellectual property rights ecosystem in India. When we want to be Viksit Bharat, obviously the knowledge economy has got to be something that we have to talk about. But in order to be a knowledge power, you need to have an IPR, the intellectual property rights ecosystem that really can compete. But our patents regime is very, very inefficient, or was till very recently. So let me show you how it was just 10 years ago. Look at the very first column. So 10 years ago, China was granting about 3.5 lakh patents a year. The US was granting about 3 lakh patents a year. And India was just doing 6,323. How can you even compete? Yeah. Now, since then, the number of patents that China is granting has grown to almost 1 million, as you can see. Dramatic increases in patents. Now, admittedly, a lot of them are poor quality. But even if you take the good quality, my estimate is they are doing at least 3 lakh decent quality patents a year. Not bad at all. And which is about the same as what the US is doing, a little more than 3 lakh patents. But look at the number of patents we did in 2023. 1 lakh patents. Dramatic increase. Okay. How did that happen? It happened because what I discovered when I got into this a few years ago is that the problem was not that our process, there were many inefficiencies in our process, which I have also fixed. But the single biggest problem was you just didn't have enough examiners and controllers. So in 2015-16, India had only 132 examiners and 139 controllers. That's a total of 271. Just to put it in context, America has 8,200 odd people, and China has 13,700. Now, how can you play a match where the other side has got 13 players and you've got 0.2 players? You're definitely going to lose. So this is something that I have been pushing for quite aggressively, and we have, as you can see, begun to hire into this. So some of the improvement you saw is because of this. But I have managed to get approvals for adding about another 1,500 odd people into this. So this year, 24-25, we have hired another 553 people. So by this year, our number will go up. In this financial year, it'll go up to 1,383. And we are going to hire another 1,000 on the next year or so. So our numbers will suddenly dramatically go up. But let me show you what has happened as a result of this. The problem that has now happened as a result, let me go back, is that as a result of this expansion in capacity, you have to now look at the filings list. You see, the number of grants is usually about 40% of the number of filings. You cannot do more than that. I mean, more than 40% of grants is very unusual. That's roughly what happens in China. And the US, it's even much tougher to do it. They're also about 40%. Yeah. In India, what has happened is that our pipeline of filing has been going up very, very slowly. Grants dramatically went up, as a result of which we cleared our backlog. But the number of applications is simply not going up fast enough. So in fact, I now have the full numbers for the year 24-25, for the full year. December, so the last quarter also I have. I now have about 1 lakh applications a year. That is equivalent to about 45,000 grants. That's what I can give out. And remember, I can only give out grants, it's not like if I get an application today, I give you a grant tomorrow. I have to wait for some time. There's a process. So the problem we are now facing is that the government system here has actually expanded out, but the inflow of patent applications has not. So this is something where the R&D ecosystem, particularly of the private sector, really has to kick in. Indian private sector simply is not doing R&D. They used to complain it's because of the difficulty of patenting. Let me say we have solved that problem. We are waiting, and now I'm hiring even more people. So I will, by 18 months' time, have the capacity to, on a routine basis, do handle 250,000 filings. About 2.5 times of what is coming in today. That will allow me to be able to grant about 1 lakh patents a year. So the government has dramatically expanded capacity. We are now waiting for the R&D ecosystem of India to respond. Now comes to type 6. This is a case where a state mandated activity is adding friction to the system. How many of you are lawyers and know what mediation is? Do you know what mediation is? Yeah, there are quite a few people who seem to be nodding. So mediation, for those who don't know, is a pre-litigation process where two parties have some sort of a dispute. Before going to the courts, they can mediate. And some new laws have been put in place to allow that, to give it some legal framework. And so India has a very overburdened legal system. It's very slow. So the idea was, which I favor, that if rather than go to the court, go to a mediator, sort it out. Don't have to, this thing can be sorted out. No problem with that. The problem was that when this law was introduced for commercial cases in 2015, some lawyers seem to have slightly put into the law the idea that it is mandatory to do this for all commercial disputes. Okay, mandatory. Now what happens as a result of this is that every time two companies have some conflict, they have to mediate even if they don't want to. And here is the data of what happens as a result of this. 97 to 98% of these cases do not get solved by mediation. They still have to go into litigation. But they have to spend 6 months hanging around with the mediator as a result of this thing being made compulsory. And of course, the mediators and the lawyers love this. They have no need to improve services because they have to go to them. They're providing poor quality service. But I've been now trying for the last 2 years to make this voluntary, and I've not succeeded. Every time they make some petition, some nonsensical reason why we shouldn't change this and keep it compulsory. But this is another battle that I haven't yet won. But I'm telling you this because this is an example of an interest group randomly inserting a piece of friction into the process in order to benefit from it. This is a common problem. Many of the inefficiencies of India's processes, laws, etc. are interestingly being inserted by the same people who complain most about it. They are usually incumbents who benefit from these inefficiencies because that creates a moat for them. I routinely go to these industry bodies and they all complain about the government processes, etc. In most cases, when I dug in and discovered that those inefficiencies are there because at some point in time it is the same industry body which wanted it. And in fact, when I try to remove those inefficiencies, they get very worked up. Because in fact, the reason they're there is to keep out competitors. So many of the reforms that I am talking about, so all the lawyers complain about this, but when I try to remove them, no lawyer wants this removed. But I'll get rid of it. Now comes type 7. This is about getting rid of outdated government agencies. Now, any large system will have lots of outdated agencies, departments, units of all kinds. It's true of governments, it's true of large companies, it will be true of universities. Any large system will have this. This will be true of central government, state government. And many of these bodies may have had some use originally, but have outlived their use. In some cases, they had no use to start with. They were created because some politician, or more often a judge or a bureaucrat, wanted to create a post-retirement gig. So Secretary Sahab creates some body of some sort, and then by some miracle, they, after retirement, become the chairman or director of that body, and they continue to live in Delhi in a bungalow allocated to the director and a bangla, gadi, etc. That was the purpose of these. So Delhi is littered with these kinds of bodies. This is for the central government. All the state governments have these. But the best ones are the ones that I have discovered are the ones central government wants but are hidden away in some remote place in northeastern state, and nobody really knows what it does. So, the Indian Institute of Palmistry, and there'll be one department for the right hand and one for the left hand. And one will be in some remote place in one end of the country and another in another end of the country, and then they will have a few hundred acres of land, which when you visit it, you will find all kinds of unauthorized use of it. And the chairman is some bureaucrat who retired in 1922. So I began working on this a few years ago. Honorable Prime Minister asked me to look at some of these ministries, and I discovered literally that these were just for autonomous bodies. The Indian government has the central government has some 840 odd of them. And in the last few years, we have shut down quite a few of them. Let me name a few. There is the Tariff Commission, the All India Handloom Board, the All India Handicraft Board, the Central Organization of Modernization of Workshops, the Rashtriya Mahila Kosh, the Children's Film Division, and so on and so forth. And every time you try to shut these down, you will be told you are a fascist. So when we decided to shut down the All India Handicraft Board, the lady who was the chairman for some 20 odd years of this body wrote an article in the newspaper saying that this is a fascist government that does not care for artisans and so on. Now look, we have no problem with handicrafts and artisans. Question is, does this particular body serve the cause that it's supposed to do, and is it doing something? After all, there are many bodies. There are state government bodies that are doing things for artisans. There are central government bodies also. There is other bodies like the National Silk Board. There is the Khadi Udyog and the cottage industries. All kinds of bodies that are doing. Question is, does this body do something? So when we shut it down, as I said, the lady who was, I won't name her, but she's a very well-known person, who was heading it for some 20 odd years, wrote an article in the newspaper stating that this government was a fascist government for shutting it down. So this body happened to be under the textile ministry, and the then textile minister was Smriti Iraniji. She tweeted back stating that if the said lady could provide minutes of any meeting that this body had held in the last 16 years, she would be very happy to reinstate the body. We are still waiting. Let me give you another example, the Tariff Commission. Okay? So till 1991, as all of you know, we were basically a socialist country. So one of the very powerful organizations in the government of that time was something called the Bureau of Industrial Cost and Pricing. This was the body that set the prices for industrial inputs like various grades of steel, cement, aluminium, copper, blah, blah, blah. And you can imagine it was very powerful, because if that body set the price of something 1 rupee up or down, it could make or break that industry. And you can imagine that it was all the kinds of misuses that came with it. So the person who was the head of that, a secretary level official, was a very powerful person. Now 1991 happened, and now all these commodities were set by market prices. So this body became defunct. It used to have, at its height, some 300, 400 people working in it. It had several floors. If you go to Khan Market, behind it you'll see this ugly grey building. They had 3 floors there. And there were several hundred people working in it. And he was a very powerful person. And overnight, this body suddenly had no powers. But despite 1991, nobody bothered to actually shut down the body. So it continued to exist. Till I discovered them during COVID. When I was doing this thing, I looked this body up and discovered that this body still exists, except somewhere in the 90s it had changed its name to the Tariff Commission. The problem was that it had nothing to do with setting tariffs. It was in the wrong place. You see, in most countries, as in India, the tariffs of the country are set between the finance ministry and the commerce ministry and the relevant department, supposing it's pharmaceuticals or whatever. That's how it's usually set. This is actually in the Department of Industry, which has nothing to do with tariff setting. And yet it was called the Tariff Commission, continued to have a very senior official, who was my neighbor, who was heading it. So when I discovered this, I wrote a note, like I had been asked to do this job, so I wrote a note, sent it up to PM, saying that this body should be shut down. So the person who was heading this commission wrote a complaint against me to the cabinet secretary. So the cabinet secretary called a meeting, and I explained that this body exists. You explain what does it have to do with setting tariffs. So the cabinet secretary had also called the commerce secretary and the chairman of the CBITC, that is Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. And he asked both of them, so have you ever set any of your tariffs based on a tariff commission recommendation? Both of them at least stated that they'd never heard of it. So that led in 2022 to the shutting down of the Tariff Commission. Many people have never forgiven me for doing this. I can carry on with these kinds of bodies. There are many other bodies. There was the Directorate of Film Festivals, whose only purpose was to officially go and hand over the official entry of India to the Cannes Film Festival. Evidently, it required them to fly to Cannes and physically hand it over. So many of these bodies are now no longer exist. Anyway, the purpose of this presentation was, ladies and gentlemen, to give you a flavor of the large amounts of process reforms that are happening in India. As you can tell, the approach that we have taken in India is to do it through attrition warfare. One reform at a time, dig through it and do it. It is a different approach than what Elon Musk is doing. It is slower, which is why we are very often accused in India of not being fast enough. But it is meticulous, as you can see. It is hard work. And it is not the case that I always succeed and win. As you can see, in many of these cases, they are still work in progress, despite a lot of effort on my part. And it doesn't make one popular very often, particularly with my neighbors, because I live in a government colony. But it has impact. When it works, it really works. It really changes. As I gave you an example of a process that suddenly became, reduced the amount of time it took by 88%. This is not trivial. And we are doing literally hundreds of these, thousands. In fact, I have been involved along with the late chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Bibek Debroy. He's unfortunately no longer alive. He passed away a few months ago. He and I worked on getting rid of literally over 1,000 outdated laws, many of them going back to the colonial 19th century laws, and so on and so forth. So the whole system really, piece by piece, is being cleaned up. Sometimes feels thankless, but now that so many of them have happened and people are beginning to appreciate it, they've now been, press has also caught on to the fact that these things are being now covered more widely, and the cumulative impact of it is beginning to flow through. It is now becoming quite obvious that this is an important effort that we are doing. And so with that, let me say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.